You again. I saw you that day on Boulder Street, you know. We all did. There were clear skies, a beautiful day. The temperature was perfect. The neighborhood kids gathered outside and played freeze tag as their mothers brought out pitchers of lemonade and their fathers barbecued in their backyards. What a wonderful day that was. I couldn't have predicted it. I don't think anyone could have. It couldn't have been real. Not on such a pleasant day anyway. I was lounging on my porch swing when it happened. You'd called me prior and said you were going to walk from Marcy's house down the street to visit me. I always liked when you visited me. Maybe you liked visiting me, too. Stroking a hand through Melon's fur, I inhaled slowly as I leaned my head back onto the swing, finally letting myself relax after weeks of consistent working. I could hear the ice cream truck song chiming in the distance and all of the children in the proximity shouting with joy. That's when I heard you call to me from across the street. You were there, standing barefoot on the driveway of Mr. Luther's house in a graphic tee and jean shorts. The sun made your blonde hair look like it was a golden flame. You had that silly, playful grin plastered on your face as you waved a bottle of wine at me. I can still see it so clearly in my mind. I smiled fondly and waved back, gesturing for you to join me on the front porch. You skipped down from the driveway like a giddy schoolgirl as the song of the ice cream truck gradually rang louder. I got up from my chair, ready to greet you the moment you set foot onto my lawn. It was half a millisecond even. Faster than you could blink. Time didn't stop or anything. Nothing happened in slow motion, it just happened. You stayed smiling, even when the brightly colored ice cream truck slammed into your frail body like a wrecking ball. I remember it so clearly, how your body tumbled over the top of the truck and crashed into the concrete at the bottom, how the blood seeped out from under you and dyed the road crimson. The bottle of wine you were holding flew across the street and shattered into a million pieces at my toes. For a beat, no one dared to move. Out of shock, maybe? Basketballs slipped under kids' fingers. Parents stopped in their tracks to stare in shock at your unmoving form. And when that silent moment was over, everyone screamed. My mouth opened to scream too, but no sound escaped from my lips. That was it. That was the end of you. Gone in less than the blink of an eye. I went to your funeral, of course. Most of us did. How could we not? You were pure joy. A ball of light that everyone adored. Everyone cried, sobbed for hours even after it was over. A closed casket. Your body was too damaged to be put on display. I thought that was the last time I would see you. So why did you keep coming back to me? The first time was when I was washing dishes. I finished scrubbing a plate clean, and when I turned around to place it in the dishwasher, you were there. You were leaning against the wall, smiling at me. Not in a creepy way. I wasn't scared. When I blinked, you were gone. You never talked to me. Just stood there and smiled. I enjoyed your company, actually. It was easier for me to not have you out of my life completely. I enjoyed your company until it became a problem. You kept appearing, more often than before. Every time I turned, you would be there. I could almost feel you breathing down my neck at some times. I sat in a ball in the middle of my dark room, body trembling with sobs. You stood in front of me smiling, your head tilted a bit. This time your presence didn't feel warm to me. It filled me with terror. After that, I couldn't see you in a good way anymore. You began to frighten me. You took over my life, really. I couldn't sleep after a while, couldn't eat. I stopped going to work, stopped taking showers, just laid in bed, squeezing my eyes shut as I wished you would just go away. You again. Just as I thought you'd finally gone away. You again. Standing centimeters away from me as I sat in my room in the mental ward. You again. Smiling. Like you were when you died. I think the fear of being blind comes from feeling as though you'll miss the world around you. Detective Stevens sat across from the painter, a chill in the air. The frost of December glazed the lone window, obstructing the view of the yard beyond. Accompanying the conversation was the occasional pop of a log from the fireplace. Standing on an easel on the far side of the room was a painting draped in a dark cloth. Sir, you do understand that people are going mad after viewing your painting. Detective Stevens stared into the cloudy eyes of the man. Some have even resorted to suicide. The silence hung in the air like a bad odor. Do you even know what you've painted? Still, the painter refused to answer. Detective Stevens climbed out of his chair and slowly approached the covered artwork. The soft satin cloth glared at him with its blank expression. For some reason he couldn't explain, Stevens felt afraid to reveal it. One trembling hand reached forward. "Don't!" the painter yelled, standing up from his chair. "Do that, detective." For a moment his hand hung in the air. An eternity passed in those few seconds. The room seemed to stand in suspended animation as he decided if he would obey the painter. His hand dropped. The painter spoke. "Do you know what it's like to create art you can't see, detective?" The painter raised his slim figure from the leather-backed chair. Slowly, he felt his way across the room to a bottle of whiskey sitting near the fireplace. He removed the cap. "Drink?" he asked as he poured himself a glass. "No, thank you," the detective responded. The clinking of ice cubes rang out in rhythm with the painter's steps as he approached Stevens. The aroma of the drink gently made its way into his nostrils. He wanted a drink. This whole investigation had him on edge. "I may not be able to see my work, detective." The painter sipped his drink. "But I know every single line I paint. The abstract visions of a blind man granted me sanctuary after my accident. There was no guarantee anyone would like these images, detective. But I was blessed." The familiar silence filled the room once again. A strong breeze rattled the windows. A storm was brewing outside. "So I decided to show everyone my blessing, detective. And the world couldn't handle it." The painter walked back towards the fire. Detective Stevens remained glued to his spot, the covered artwork taunting him. Every single person who has viewed the painting became incoherent, their native tongue degraded into a string of nonsense. Numerous tests were ran, but it was impossible to get any information from them. Because all of the viewings had been in private at the artist's request, no one could explain what they had seen. Now Stevens was so close to solving the mystery. "Look at it, detective." The painter had his back turned to Stevens as he talked. Stevens looked over his shoulder at the painter before turning his gaze back to the painting. He felt his heartbeat at the tips of his fingers. Once again, he reached towards the cloth. This time, he would commit to removing it. Between his thumb and pointer finger, he grasped the cloth, slowly pulling it off of the frame. A gentle thud came from the sheet as it landed on the hardwood floor. Detective Stevens wasn't sure what he had expected to see beneath that cloth, but he was certain it wasn't the mirror that greeted him. "What is this?" He stared at his own look of surprise as he spoke. His eyes widened as he glimpsed the painter behind him. The painter stood still with his hand dangling by his side, still holding his glass of whiskey. But something else was there.
a dark figure appeared to protrude from his back just below his neck. 2 arms as dark as midnight wrapped around the painter's head. "Now you see it, detective." The painter slowly turned around to face Stevens. Clawed hands clasped around the painter's eyes, completely covering his face. As he made his way closer to the detective, the second face became visible. A twisted mass nearly void of features save for a mouth kept its lips pressed close to the painter's ears, lips moving as though whispering endlessly. There was no body. Instead, it seemed to protrude from within the detective like a parasite. "This is my blessing." The painter rested his hand upon Stevens' shoulder once again. Detective Stevens was completely petrified as he stared into the mirror. He could do nothing but watch as the head slowly placed its lips up to his ears. Then the whispering began. Whispers of secrets no man should hear. Whispers that shattered Stevens' mind, leaving him staring dumbfounded at his own reflection. The painter slowly walked past Stevens. He stooped down and retrieved the cloth from the floor. With great finesse, he hid the mirror once again. "Now you see it, detective." The painter ushered Stevens to the door. "My blessing is my greatest work of art."
As a young girl, I've been told by my parents countless times that I should be careful when I go out alone, and that I should always be aware of my surroundings and of a way to escape. I was naive at the time and didn't think much of it, because what could happen to a young girl such as myself? I was merely a child. But as I grew up, things started to get a lot more dangerous. In college, I used to work at a night bar a few blocks away from my apartment. It was my first steady job, and it paid quite well, which was really good because I needed the money. Now, you know how when you go to bars, there's always that one girl employee that you can't get your eyes off of? That was me. And yes, I'd use my power to get a lot of hookups, but this also drew the attention of unwanted older men who came up there to escape work and home. That's what I thought in that night as well. It was a cold night from what I can remember on a Friday. I was about to finish my shift, which was a relief. There was this one man who sat there from the beginning of my shift up to that point, constantly asking for refills and trying to strike up a conversation with me. I, of course, knew what he wanted, so I tried to be as cold with him as customer service etiquette would allow me to be. But he just wouldn't give up. So when my shift was finally over, I was more than glad that I could just leave. I told the man he needs to go because the bar was closing, and he didn't say anything. He just got up and left. About 15 minutes after that, I locked all the doors and made my way home. About 2 minutes after I started walking, I got this strange feeling that I was being watched. I quickly glanced behind me. There was no one there, but I swear I saw a shadow move. I shrugged it off and continued walking, this time deciding to call my best friend, who is usually up at this hour playing video games. But he didn't pick up. That's weird, I thought. Maybe he just went to sleep earlier today. I wrapped my jacket tighter around me and continued walking. I was almost on my street when I heard the sound of footsteps other than mine. I stopped and looked behind me. There he was. The man from the bar. He stared at me, but I still couldn't see his face. "Leave me alone or I will call the police," I said, confident, hoping that would suffice. But it didn't. He glanced down and then took a step into the light coming from the lamppost. That's when I saw his face. He didn't look like what I'd seen at all at the bar. His eyes were red, glowing with malice. His mouth was toothless, except for a pair of fangs. And then something even more frightening happened. He grinned and 6 more eyes appeared on his face out of nowhere. I screamed in terror and started running towards my apartment building. I didn't even look back, even though I could hear him laughing, and then the sound of flesh tearing apart. I didn't want to know what was following me. When I finally got into my apartment, I locked all the doors and windows and I sat next to the kitchen counter, knife in hand, trying to contact the police. Something followed me back from work. I don't know what he is, but I think he's trying to get into my apartment. I said, this time visibly more terrified. They said that they're sending police as fast as they can, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't be fast enough. I had to do this myself. I waited for something to happen. I knew it was going to, and then I heard it. A gentle tapping on my living room window, and there he was. I screamed in terror when I saw what was hanging at my window. He was there, same malice-filled grin. But he didn't even resemble a human anymore. He had 8 massive, hairy, spider-like legs with which he kept banging my window, hoping he would get in. I quickly ran to my bathroom and locked the door, thinking what small chance I had of escaping. I heard the sound of the window smashing, a sign that he definitely managed to enter my house. I glanced around the bathroom to look for something that could help me. I found bug spray, but could that be of any use? Still, it was my best chance of escaping, so I grabbed it, opened the cap, and as soon as the door opened, I sprayed the crap out of him, especially in the eyes. This stunned him for a while, so I saw my chance and ran past him towards the front door. My hands were shaking so hard I had problems unlocking the door. I could hear him getting out of the bathroom, which meant it was now or never. I managed to unlock the door in time and ran down the stairs as fast as I could. But it still wasn't fast enough. He caught me at the second floor and grabbed me with one of his legs. I couldn't even breathe. I tried moving, but that only tightened his grip. I closed my eyes, not wanting to look at that horrific face anymore. He said something unintelligible, and then... sirens. The monster was distracted by that as well, so I saw the opportunity and tried to escape again, accidentally kicking him in one of his eyes. He looked at me and then... he dropped me onto the floor and disappeared through the back door. I was pretty shook, and when the cops found me and asked me what happened, I was mumbling nonsense. I kept staring at the back door, waiting for him to come back. But he never did. I quit my job at the bar the next day. I started sleeping with bug spray next to me, and I never go out alone, especially at night. Nothing has happened since. But, it's almost midnight as I'm writing this, and there's this tiny red glow coming from the other side of the street. And now I'm scared. I'm posting here because I don't know what to do. I've never experienced anything like this, and I am terrified out of my mind. So for context, I live in Sydney, Australia. I teach at a guitar school, and you finish up late because all the lessons have to be taught out of work hours. I got home around 10 this evening, and man, I was really tired. Teaching is rewarding, but it can be very emotionally draining, and believe me, after a day of kids yelling at me, refusing to listen, and one even throwing a guitar at me, I was emotionally drained. I walked down the hall into my room, turned around to hang up my satchel, and groaned. Right on the wall to my room was a big, fat Huntsman spider, one of the biggest I'd ever seen. If you haven't seen one, they're part of the tarantula family, and it's not surprising to see one as big as your hand. This one wasn't far off. I like to think of myself as a relatively kind person, and I try not to kill things if I don't have to. On the other hand, I am quite arachnophobic, and I was not prepared to have that thing scuttling around my room at night. There's an acacia tree next door that they tend to breed in, and huntsmen have an unsettling habit of cropping up at night when you're least prepared. I thought of the can of Mortine bug spray I kept in the bathroom and considered. No, my kinder nature got the best of me, and I went into the kitchen to get a bowl and some cardboard to trap it in. When I returned, it was in the same place. I slowly walked up to it and brought the bowl down on the door. The huntsman was too quick, though. It skittered away from me higher up the wall. I tried again, but this time it was ready for me and ran up out of reach. I grunted in frustration. Why now? Why this late at night when I'm tired, irritable, and my hand-eye coordination is at its worst? Ugh. Deciding I just have to brush it down to get access, I went to fetch the broom. It saw me coming and ran out of the way, down the wall towards me this time. Seizing my chance, I slammed the bowl down on the wall. It came right down on top of the hairy creature, cutting it in two. I took the bowl off it, and it dropped to the floor in two pieces. It wasn't even writhing. Ugh. I looked at the two halves of the corpse for a second. In death, it looked pitiful. Not scary at all. Spiders tend to curl up when they die, some kind of insect rigor mortis, I guess, and both halves had done this. I did feel bad for a minute. I hate killing things unnecessarily, but honestly, I was so tired at this point, my main emotion was just relief. I couldn't even be bothered to put away the bowl or the spider's body. I just left it there, thinking I'd get it in the morning. I think that was my biggest mistake. I got into bed and cuddled up with my blankets. I live by myself, so I like to stretch out at night with a few pillows. I was just dozing off when I felt a little tickle at my feet. I was jerked into wakefulness, my heart pounding. No, I was just being silly. I'd probably just imagined it. I stayed awake for another minute or so, my heart racing before I began to drift off again. My eyes were just shutting when I became aware of a shape on the roof. It was vague in the dark, but I could definitely make it out. A dark blob on the ceiling. I reached over to turn on the nightlight and flicked it on. Would you believe it? Another Huntsman. This one even bigger than the last. With a groan of frustration, I made to get up. I wouldn't even try to trap this one, just smush it with a broom. But then I began to see the other blobs on the wall. 2, 3, 4, 5. I lost count at 13. There wasn't just one Huntsman now. They were swarming, absolutely swarming around the roof of my room. I felt the tickle under my blanket again. Oh God. I ripped the duvet off. 10 more of them were on my bed, crawling towards me. I don't think I scare easily, but honestly, I screamed. They weren't running away anymore. They were running towards me. One was crawling up my leg. Now I shook it off and got out of the room, desperate to try and get out of there. I ran across the floor and I felt something crunch and squish under my foot. Now they were beginning to drop on me from the roof. Ah! I felt one bite me. Huntsmen aren't poisonous, but they have big fangs in it, and it hurt, man. I got out of the roof and ran into the bathroom and shut the door. Now I'm in here, in the bathroom, typing this up on my phone. I have a few squeezed under the door, but it's so small that I can easily stomp on them with the mop I keep in here. A few more are coming in through the vent, and that's not easy to stop. They seem endless. Does anyone here have any idea what's going on? There must be thousands of them. What do they want? Vengeance for killing their brother? Oh, God, it's getting worse. I don't think I can hold them off for long. Hi everyone, Giggles here. Just wanted to say thank you to all of my incredible patrons for supporting me. Tam B, Jen Miser, Sky Mara Ravenswood, Melissa Perez, Bernard Jackson, Leaf Ninja, Roy Larmer, Mr. Creepypasta, Neon Scoundrel, and William Delphin. I'm still figuring out rewards for Patreon, but if you would still like to support, click the link in the description and I will hopefully have something for you guys soon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. A few weeks ago, I started to have a toothache. It wasn't unbearable at first, but with time it became more annoying. Hot and cold foods gradually became impossible to eat. Biting on anything too hard would send waves of sharp pain upward into my jaw. Now, I've always disliked visiting the dentist, and over the years, I'll admit, I don't see them that often. Only when it becomes an emergency do I drag myself in for a checkup. I didn't feel like it was at that stage yet, despite the pain. Instead, I found myself becoming more and more obsessed with my tooth. I would wiggle it with my tongue and tug at it lightly with my fingers just to see how loose it was. The idea came to me that if I could get it out myself, I wouldn't have to go into the dentist, and so that became my new life's mission. Now, pulling your own tooth isn't easy. Every now and then I would get up the courage to give it a good yank, only to have nothing happen. It was apparently still too firmly attached. Eventually, I found it difficult to eat anything that wasn't soup, so I put up with the pain for a few more days, and after that, then decided enough was enough. Took a pair of pliers from the shed and cleaned them well. I then sat with these pliers beside me in the bathroom for hours, gathering the courage to actually just rip it out. Repeatedly, I told myself it needed to be done here and now, or I needed to go to the dentist. I procrastinated long enough to get angry with myself. It was just a loose, rotted tooth. Just pull it, I told myself. And in a moment of rage-fueled determination, I reached into my mouth and clamped the pliers around my tooth. At the count of 3, I ripped my tooth out. It dislodged with a wet slop and some horrific cracking sounds. Blood ran freely, and I looked like someone had punched a tooth out rather than pulled it out. Hurriedly, I stuffed some cotton balls up into the hole to stop the bleeding. I want to say there was instant relief from the pain, but the reality is that it hurt at least 4 times worse now. The bleeding seemed to go on forever as I agonized. I took painkillers, but they barely dulled it. Eventually, I took something a little stronger for the pain and passed out. When I woke up, things were a little better. The searing pain was now a dull ache, and the bleeding seemed to have stopped, though my saliva was still tinted red. I went about my day as normal. I knew I shouldn't poke the fresh hole too much, so I mostly left it alone. Though over the next few days, it was irritating in a new way. Sure, not painful to eat, but it sort of tickled me. Occasionally, it almost felt as though something was moving in the hole. When I touched it with my tongue, I felt the squishy blood clot, and I hurt my tongue on something sharp. Probably a piece of bone, I assumed. That was to be expected, but I was worried about developing a dry socket or something. After about a week, things didn't improve. In fact, they worsened. The sensation that something was wriggling in the hole socket was almost constant, and it was driving me mad. Finally, I decided to see if I could see anything in the hole, maybe a stray piece of food that had lodged itself in there or something. Using my phone as a light, I stood in front of the mirror and tried to look into my mouth. Almost immediately, I saw it. Something black was dangling down from the hole. The dead nerve ending, I thought, and in complete disgust, I made the worst decision of my life. I reached for the tweezers to pull it out. Grabbing it was fairly easy, but when I pulled it, pain erupted upwards into my sinuses. Shocked, I dropped the tweezers before I could look at what I had pulled out, and it took me a moment to regather myself enough to find the piece I had dropped. Through a haze of pain, I looked at the slim black item. It wasn't a nerve. It was oddly shaped, unmoving, and bent slightly. A worm? No. Worse. A leg. It was the wet, black, hairy leg of a spider. Every decision I had made from that moment onward was done in frantic panic. I ran straight to my liquor cabinet and picked out the highest alcohol content drink I could grab within 3 seconds or less. It was vodka. Good enough. I drank it straight from the bottle and filled my mouth. Ugh. It burned my tongue, but I held the liquid there until I could feel the thing in my tooth hole writhing. It was excruciating. It felt like it was trying to dig its way out of my mouth. I staggered back to the bathroom. My eyes were watering and my nose was starting to drip. I could feel something moving inside my face, and when I looked in the mirror, I could see the tiniest baby spiders coming out of my nose and left eye. They wriggled their way out, escaping with the liquid coming out of my sinuses. When I spat out the vodka, it was dyed red with blood, and the vile black mass of a spider came with it. In the sink, it twitched and jerked about as the alcohol burned it. I was surprised it was still alive and horrified by how big it was. I rinsed with the vodka repeatedly. Baby spiders came out with every cycle, and once I had emptied the bottle, I switched to water. Eventually, no more of the revolting creatures were visible in my spit. My eyes and nose gradually stopped watering. I felt like I had purged well enough that none were left, but I still felt sick to my stomach. I sat on the floor and cried alone for some time. The experience was the most traumatic thing I have ever been through. Back when I was at school, I was asked all the time what it felt like to be alone. I'm an adult now and have moved away from the small town I grew up in, but the emotional scars remain. Growing up, I lived in a modest house with my mom and dad, which was just down the road from my school. I was old enough to walk to school myself. My dad was away with work a lot, and my mom held down 2 jobs, cleaning for one of the well-to-do families and a secretarial position. So I guess this suited them as well. It would be far enough to say I was a solitary child. I spent a lot of time with my head in a book. I loved science fiction best. When I was not traveling to Mars or battling gas monsters on Venus in my imagination, I used to like to walk down to the river and throw pebbles in the water. This was when I was the happiest. Being at school was the worst time for me. There were only a few hundred people who lived in town and only one school. There were 13 of us in my class, 6 sets of twins, and me. Now, with the hindsight of time and having lived life, I can see that this was weird. I looked up the stats just now, and there are 33 twins in every 1,000 live births in this country. So there's nothing odd about being an only child, apart from in that cramped room where I sat by myself at a table near the window. All the others sat in pairs. 3 of the twins were boys, 2 girls, and 1 mixed. 2 sets of twins were identical, and the others weren't. Our teacher was a spinster in the parlance of those days. She spent most of the school day writing on the chalkboard or reading to us from textbooks. There was never any rowdy behavior for her to deal with. The twins would sit in perfect silence all day long. Having no one to talk to, I did the same. Each pair of twins seemed to be in sync, opening their books at the same time, turning pages in one flowing movement, writing at the same speed. At lunchtime, when we took out our packed lunches, I swear they even chewed their food at the same pace. Doing everything differently and on my own, I stuck out real bad. And as each endless school day dragged on, I could tell I was being stared at. The teacher never said anything about the situation, never extending me a helping hand. I can only assume she saw nothing wrong. And in her defense, it was only as we were filing out of school that anything blatant ever happened. The sets of twins would take it in turns to whisper as they passed me. "What does it feel like to be alone?" This only lasted for a minute or so, but every day, as soon as I thought I was out of sight of them, I would sprint for home and throw myself onto my bed, bury my head into the pillow, and burst into tears. I thought this would never change. The way it did haunts me to this day. They were called Thomas and James Morton. They were identical in every way, as far as I could see. It was a Saturday afternoon in late spring, and I had gone down to the river to skim pebbles across the surface of the water. My troubles weren't forgotten, but they did seem further away when I saw them. The Morton twins. They were standing higher up the riverbank looking down at me. I froze. There was a glimmer of darkness in their eyes. Of malice. A smile flickered across their faces as they moved together towards me. I started to back away and I felt cold water lapping at my feet. I was standing in the river. I glanced around, trying to see a way to escape. The other bank was too steep and overgrown with weeds to scramble up. I didn't know what the twins wanted with me, but my guts were screaming at me that it was bad. I felt hunted and very afraid. They kept walking, each step in time. Without really being aware that I moved deeper into the river. It was shallow in places and slow-moving, but soon transformed into a deep, fast-running body of water. A dozen paces away from where I stood, I could see where the river began to flow at speed. I think the Morton twins must have spotted this as well, because they entered the water and stood in front of me, blocking me from the shallows. "What does it feel like?" they began in unison. "To be alone. What does it feel like? What does it feel like? Alone, alone, alone." As they spoke, they inched closer. I kept retreating backwards. I could feel the water rising around my knees. It was getting harder and harder to move. I wanted to cry, to scream out, but there was no one to help me. There never had been. I was alone. They were as one. Suddenly they rushed me. I stumbled, fell. I was not thinking clearly. I did not plan. It did not mean for it to happen. I stuck out a hand to cushion my fall and found myself on my backside, the water enveloping me. I felt a stone on the riverbed, lifted it free of the water, and lashed out. I didn't mean to. I caught one of the twins on the forehead. To this day, I do not know which one. He cried out in pain and fell forwards into the river. The flow caught him and he was carried away. Within seconds, he was 12 feet away, 24, until he reached a pool where the river's flow was stilled, where he remained. He was face down in the water, wasn't moving in any way. I had been transfixed by what I was seeing until I heard gasping. I turned around to see the other twin. He was still standing close to me, up to his knees in the water. He was clutching his chest, was clearly struggling to breathe. And then he stopped gulping in air. He just stood there, looking into the distance at his twin floating motionless in the river. He did not speak to me, did not look at me as he waded past, as he lay face down in the water and let the flow take him. He did not struggle as he drowned. I could only stand and watch. The current brought him to his brother. Their bodies were silent and still. They were together as they had always been, as they always will be. I was scared. I would spend the rest of my life on my own. I had only one sister, and she faded when I was about 10 years old. I was watching television. That's a good place to start. Yes, I was watching television. I started to switch the channels. I used to love cartoons. Who doesn't, anyway? Normally, there were about 3 to 4 different cartoon channels, and I could easily find something to watch. But that day, everything seemed to be boring. I started to switch to adult channels. Usually, the classic channels were between 1 and 30. But I went up and up. I was alone in the room, and I was a little nervous. We had this huge saloon. It was very cold. We only used that room when there were guests in the house. I wasn't supposed to be there. I knew they were just channels, nothing to be scared about, but I was wondering who would watch them. There were countless possibilities of what I could see, and that was giving me the creeps. Mostly there were some unpopular traditional movies. I went up to the hundreds, and there were channels showing the old records of fish tanks. There were different kinds of fish inside, and they seemed to be just swimming around. I waited a bit to see if they would eat something, but no, nada. They were just swimming. No one was feeding them. I thought maybe they fed the fish when it wasn't recording. I realized that I was scared even more. These fish were soulless, I thought. The screen was pale, and there was this classical music, even more soulless. It makes me wonder, who is the director of this? I felt like I couldn't go up anymore. My fear conquered me, and I got out of the room. I went to my mother as she was doing the dishes. I looked at her, but she didn't notice me. I don't know why, but I didn't call her. I just waited. She kept doing the dishes and finally felt my presence. "Oh, hey, you scared me. What do you want?" I couldn't think of anything to say to her. I didn't want to tell her about my little adventure. I kept looking at her eyes. "Something wrong?" she asked. My mother used to call me fond nicknames. I loved it. "No, Mommy," I replied. She told me to go and play with my sister. Well, I was still curious about the channels. I got out of the kitchen and went back to the television. And this time I was calmer. I went up to the 200s. There were, really hard to remember now. Politicians, yes, now I'm sure. There were politicians speaking of boring things that I couldn't understand. I can't really remember what they said, but they looked very serious. I was wondering who would watch them. Anyways, I went up and up and there, channel 300. This one was a musical channel. There wasn't any video playing on the screen, only music. I remember it was, again, classical music. I wasn't a fan of classical music as a kid. Well, I'm still not. I went up and up. There were more and more music channels without any video like the first one. Musics were different, but I realized something was the same with all of them. There was this blue screen and a ballerina image on it. She was in the air, the kind of jump that ballerinas do. And later, I learned it was called a grand jeté. She had this fading body. Her body and dress were barely visible, almost like a ghost. The only color was pale blue. Her hand in the front felt like she was calling me. Come closer. I imagined hearing her. The more I stared, she started to get more and more realistic. It looked like she was trapped there and fading. I felt like she wasn't trying to get out. She wanted me to get in. I closed the television and went back to my mom. That was a rough day. I didn't tell anyone about it. And that night, I had trouble sleeping. But when I did sleep, I saw my lovely little sister in my dream. She was with me, staring at the ballerina. The ballerina moved her hand through the screen of the TV, right into my sister's little hands. Her face is still in my mind. That blank face. She pulled my sister right into the screen. I was right. She doesn't want to get out. She wants us to get in. The next day when I woke up, I rushed to my sister. She was already awake. It was so early in the morning, but she already had that blue dress on her. Her face was paler than usual. She was staring blankly at the pavement from her open window. "Look," she said. "I will do a grand jeté." And there, she jumped. Okay, so I just want to preface this story with a disclaimer. An ASOS gift card is obviously not life or death, but an ASOS gift card that you won in a Twitter giveaway with 200 quid on it is pretty high stakes. That being said, what we had to go through to retrieve said ASOS gift card, which we did, is pretty screwed up. So, let's start properly. Just to give you a bit of context, the story involves me, Erica, who is the one getting married. She's an accountant, our friend from school, and Beth, her cousin, who had just finished a classical archaeology degree at UCL. A bit of a mixed bag, really. Cutting to the chase here, we're at a hen do in Paris, hanging outside a warehouse rave on the trendy side of town, and I've just fallen butt over boob and dropped my ASOS gift card down a grate. The guy outside the warehouse, who was in charge of the guest list, nodded us towards a slimy set of steps. The steps led towards a yawning opening in the stone wall. The man told us, in English better than our French, that if we headed through the opening, it would take us under the ground and into a disused sewer. If we wandered about half a mile or so for 15 minutes, it would take us directly under the grate where I dropped my card. It was completely dry under there, he said. It hadn't been used as part of the sewage system in over 70 years. He proved this to us. He took out a 50-cent coin and dropped it down the drain. We heard it cling against the dry concretes beneath without a hint of a splash. I'll be real with you, if any of us were even close to being sober, we wouldn't have considered it. But we were drunk, and God knows what else. It was exciting. Erica was more buzzed than me. "What a story to tell at the wedding," she said. It was like that horror film As Above, So Below, she said, only that we weren't going to the catacombs, only an old sewer, and what self-reflecting demon would haunt a sewer over a catacomb? Exactly. So let's go. We made our way down the steps, still giggling from the adrenaline and clutching onto the cold, slippery handrail that ran along the length of the river wall. It was a freezing cold night, but the minute we stepped into the opening, we felt a gust of warmth, like getting off a plane in a hot country. We headed down into the opening. It was roasting hot at this point, but completely pitch black. All we had were our phone torches, which weren't a huge amount of use. That's why I almost missed my gift card. lying on the floor. It was as the guy said. I looked up, and there was a grid shining down from the street below. I snatched up my card from the ground and put it into my pocket when I heard Prem shriek. It echoed around the tunnel, and our eyes were drawn to the opening in the side of the wall. It wasn't there before. We were drunk, and I can be pretty dozy at times, but there was no way we could have missed it unless it had just appeared. I don't know. It was glowing with the light of about 20 candles, a 50s-style dressing table with a girl sitting at it, doing her makeup. She was in a long white dress and a veil, and she was beaming. Just making eye contact with herself in the mirror and absolutely buzzing by the looks of it. It wasn't a doorway into an apartment or anything. Just an entrance to another dank, pitch-black tunnel with a dressing table in the middle of it. We were absolutely silent for a minute, until Erica spoke up. She was never one for an awkward silence, even if that was clearly the only option. "Are you okay?" she asked, and the girl snapped around and looked at her directly, making us all jump. I started to back away slightly, but the girl opened her mouth. I thought she was about to speak, but she just froze, mouth open in a smile, eyes wide, waiting. She looked at each of us in turn, mouth still open, until Beth finally cracked and asked her if we could help. The girl said something. No idea. It was in a completely foreign language, and I couldn't even hazard a guess at which one. And it was loud. Being in a dark tunnel, it feels like you have to whisper, but she basically screamed, and her high-pitched voice bounced off of the stone walls. I looked at everyone else, and they all looked as bewildered as me, but Beth was as white as a sheet. There was a deafening scraping as the girl got to her feet. She smiled at us. She laughed at us. A horrible, breathy giggle. And she started to head into the depths of the side tunnel, dragging the stool she was sitting on with her. No one followed her. We waited until the scraping noises had faded into the dark before we turned to leave. Prem went to have a look at the dressing table, but Beth's hand on his shoulder stopped him. Yeah, it was mega weird. So, ordinarily on a night out, if you're somewhere dark or weird or isolated and you see a girl on your own, you try to stick with her, get her to come with you, or at least call someone to keep an eye on her. But none of us seemed to bother. I barely remember getting out of the tunnel, actually. Only that we managed to flag down a taxi to take us back to the Airbnb. We chatted about it once we got back, of course, maybe deciding that she was high or drunk or part of a weird underground cult or something. Whatever. Beth mentioned something before we went to bed. She hadn't said a word up to this point until we asked her if she was okay. She said that the girl spoke Assyrian Aramaic, the ancient language she was studying in university. She said that it was the original language of the Bible, the original language that Jesus and his followers would have spoken. Beth said that there were discrepancies over pronunciation in the majority of the syntax, that this language hadn't been spoken properly for over thousands of years. Beth herself didn't understand it fully. But she managed to pick up 3 words. Deeper, darker, and one that could either mean rebirth or rise. As I've said, we were pretty drunk. I don't really remember going to bed, just that we went straight to the airport the next day, and no one has mentioned it since. We were probably right. She was just some drunk girl. Or not. But it's not really worth dwelling on.
Thank you for watching this video. Big shout out to my patrons, Leaf Ninja, Roy Larimer, Mr. Creepypasta, Nicole Kister, Neon Scoundrel, William Delphin, and So Much Heresy. If you want to become a patron, buy merch, or join my Discord server, be sure to check out the links in the description. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.
There's an elephant sat right on my chest. I am still alive. I do not know how it got there, but there it is indeed. I woke up like this. I felt my lungs constrict and my eyes shot open only to see endless gray. My eyes focused a bit more, finding bristled hairs and thick, stone-colored slabs of pachyderm skin. Oh, jeez, I wheezed. The trunk groped around until it found my face, leaving a damp residue where it suckered on my skin, kind of like a kiss. Ugh. I felt like this communicated that she had nowhere she needed to be going. You'd be surprised at how acquiescent an elephant can be. They're very intelligent and very empathetic. I suppose that's how she learned to move with me. Yeah, it's an elephant who goes where I go. Yeah, she's still crushing my chest. I can't even pretend to explain how this is possible, but it is, and it's my reality. Rowan at work was the only one who said something. I knew everyone else could see it. I mean, for Pete's sake, there was an elephant in my cubicle. Their eyes betrayed them with their unencumbered bewilderment. Rowan turned slightly into my cubicle from the hallway. Are you all right? I lifted my gaze to meet his. Rowan's eyes held the same astonishment as everyone else's. Oh, my. He trailed off. As he dipped away from my office, I opened the camera on my phone. It was grim. On top of looking completely disheveled, I had dark gray bags under my eyes. My eyes, which had burst blood vessels turning the whites red. My skin fared no better. More burst vessels, more spidering scarlet lines spreading across my body. It looked like I was cracking. The elephant shifted her weight again. I coughed wetly as I felt how constricted my chest cavity was. Wiping my mouth, the back of my hand came back red. I was beginning to see that I was going to have to bring someone else's attention to my elephant. Going to my job, speaking with no one. This was not going to work out in my favor at all. I needed to ask for help. As I tried to stand from my chair, I found my legs had given out on me. They are used to lifting my 100-something pounds, not thousands. Getting to the office must have wiped them out already. It's funny, I really didn't even notice. A few more shots at rising, and I was still in my chair. I looked across the hallway and saw both Rowan and Caroline in their cubicle. Help, I rasped. There was so little air I could pass from my lungs. I saw Caroline's eyes flicker up and back down almost instantly. She averted her gaze quickly. Rowan looked down shortly after making eye contact, but reconnected a moment later. I felt a flutter in my chest. Hope. Not air, but maybe the next best thing. Rowan. It came out in one syllable. Please. Rowan's face contorted as he experienced what was clearly a wide array of emotions. Looking back at his desk, he whispered, I'm sorry. I just can't. I can't. He rose and shuffled to the toilets, not daring to turn his head. There's no one else near me in this office. No one will look at me. And I can no longer call out. I wish I tried to do something about this elephant when I first woke, but I didn't. I'm still tasting blood in my throat, and do believe she has broken bones that has punctured major blood vessels and organs. There's an immense pressure in my head from the lack of oxygen and blood flow. A wisp of a laugh comes from my coppered lips, thinking it's like there's another elephant but inside of my head, trying to get her way out. It's funny, in a way. I'm struggling to see my phone screen now, and I know I'm dying soon. But this felt essential to communicate. Sometimes no one else will acknowledge the elephant in the room but you. And it is so crucial that you do acknowledge it, because she is heavy and you can only keep going for so long when she's weighing you down. You can only do so much yourself. If by some horrific reason you find yourself in my situation, please ask for help before the elephant's weight gets to be too much, before you find yourself unable to say the words. Don't wait until it's too late. I think I'm in love. Like I'm really, actually, head over heels in love. I'm talking capital L kind of love. The kind of love that keeps you up at night and makes your entire world stop turning. The kind of love that makes you go a little crazy, but in all the right ways. That kind of love. I know, this is really cliched, but please hear me out. I never thought anyone could love me before. But I was wrong. There really is someone out there for everyone. If you've ever felt like nobody could fall in love with you, or that you weren't good enough, well, trust me, you're wrong. We first met at a party, and I knew right away that he was the one for me. It was a busy party with lots of people and loud music, but when we locked eyes with each other, it was like nobody else in the entire world mattered. My friend introduced us, and we hit it off immediately. I remember feeling terribly nervous talking to him for the first time. He was so calm and cool, and I was afraid I would screw it all up. I thought he might think I was weird or awkward or something, but he didn't seem to care. I kept thinking that he would get bored of me and move on to some other prettier girl, but to my amazement, he seemed to really like me. Maybe it was just the beer talking, or maybe I was a little smitten, but everything he said seemed completely hilarious. From the minute he set his drink down next to me, I don't think I stopped laughing the entire night. On more than one occasion, I had to stop myself from blushing, and when he touched my hand, well, I sure hope somebody brought him up because I think I melted all over the floor. Have you ever been so attracted to somebody that you can't think of a single word to say back to them? Like, all you want to do is just say something incredibly clever or smooth or anything at all, really, but nothing comes out? That was me. When he asked for my number, I didn't know what to say. It was like my brain completely short-circuited, and I lost everything inside my head. Luckily, he took the phone out of my hand and texted himself with it, so I wouldn't have to. My knight in shining armor. And still, despite all my shortcomings, all of my awkwardness, and all my quirks, the spark was still there between us. We both felt it. I thought, so this is what love feels like. I love everything about him. I love the way his hair, black and wavy, curls over his forehead. I love how blue his eyes are, like tiny circular oceans. I love the little patches of hair on his chest. Not too much, not too little, but just the right amount. I love how strong his shoulders are, and how safe they make me feel. I love how warm his skin feels when I wear it. I heard my husband pull in at around 5 p.m., but it wasn't for another 10 minutes that I knew something was off. He had been sitting in his car that entire time without moving. We don't have the space for 2 cars in our driveway, so whoever gets home last has to park out on the street. Usually he walks in immediately with some hot and exciting piece of gossip from the office. Today was not that day. As I walked out, I noticed the windshield was badly cracked. The visibility through the glass was so awful, I don't even know how he managed to drive home. It was quite an annoying sight, given we just paid a fortune on the last service. He didn't even acknowledge me as I approached the car. His eyes were laser-focused on the rear vision mirror. I tried to gauge what he was looking at and glanced up the neighborhood. There was nothing out of the ordinary. It was a quiet one-way street. Cute weatherboard houses, freshly cut lawns, and a couple of shady gum trees that loomed over the neighborhood's cars. Exactly what we wanted. It seemed everyone else was inside in a bid to get out of the relentless heat wave. I opened up the passenger door and sat beside him. What happened to the windshield? He sat in silence, gaze locked onto the mirror. His mouth barely moved. Kangaroo. My stomach lurched. Hitting a kangaroo can be a death sentence for a driver. It wasn't uncommon to see them in our suburb as it fringes the rural bushland, but getting one on the road is still really scary. I could make out the bloodied point of impact in the glass. He was lucky to be unharmed. Are you okay? I don't know. It was sweltering, and he didn't have the air conditioner on. He leant over and shut my door. His eyes remained fixed on the mirror. I wanted to ask what was going on, but then I caught a glimpse. In the rear vision mirror, an obscured person stood at the top of the street. I couldn't make out their silhouette due to the shade from the gum trees, but it definitely looked human. It stood completely still. Its presence filled my body with unbridled dread. I turned my head to get a better view through the rear window. The figure vanished. And the figure vanished. It had gone in less than a second. I wish that was the last time I ever saw it. But as I glanced back into the mirror, the figure returned. I snapped my head back to the window. It disappeared. It seemed this mysterious person was only visible through the mirror's reflection. I'd never seen anything like this and thought the heat was making me hallucinate. David, what is that? I noticed my husband's breath had become quite shaky. He was terrified. I don't know, he whispered. Normally, it would be comforting to know you weren't imagining such a thing. This confirmation was anything but. The figure began to step forward. Its movements were staggered as it dragged itself to the nearest car. It slowly reached out an arm and swung open the door. It seemed to be looking for something. Unsatisfied with its results, it slammed the door and hurried to the next car in line. I think we should head inside. My husband pushed down the car door locks and looked at me with a finger over his lip. I've never seen him so scared. Small beads of sweat were streaking down his face and dripping off his chin. He shook his head and indicated for us to remain. I wanted to suggest that we drive away, turn on the engine, and never look back at the thing. However, facing the street's dead end made this option impossible. We would have to turn the car around and head straight for the figure if we were to leave. An easy escape wasn't factored in when we were initially drawn to this quiet street. We slowly slid down our chairs and watched as the figure opened and closed the neighborhood's cars, making its way up the street. It would appear to anyone watching without a mirror that the doors were moving on their own volition. Their metallic clunking rang out in a disjointed rhythm. My husband was really struggling. It seemed the stress of this ever-growing threat had caused him to repeat the only two phrases he had just uttered. Kangaroo. I don't know. Kangaroo. I don't know. The figure was far too close when I realized most of our neighbors would also have their cars locked. It clearly didn't stop the thing. We should have gone inside. The figure's footsteps approached, scuffling along the tarmac. We were next. My husband covered his mouth with a trembling hand. There was complete silence as we held our breath. The locks popped up. The back seat door swung open and we felt the weight of the figure enter. The vehicle wobbled and the back door closed. We were no longer alone. Something was breathing back there. It was a wheezy kind of breath, followed by a slight gurgle, like a lung had been punctured. I had to look. I reached up to the rearview mirror and angled it downwards. My husband stared at me with widened eyes, shocked at my curiosity. A part of me wished I hadn't done that. In the back seat was a bloodied man. He stared at me, eyes bulging in pain. He looked dead. I think he was dead. His entire face had been crushed and his body was horribly disfigured. He held up a severely broken arm and pointed it towards himself before turning it to the damaged windshield. I followed his finger to the bloodied point of the impact on the glass. I froze. I didn't want it to be true. The bloodied man fixed his gaze onto my husband's seat. My mouth was dry of any moisture, but my question still managed to scratch itself out. David? What happened with the windshield? Kangaroo. I don't know. Kangaroo. I don't know. As I closed the car door, I heard it lock behind me. Both my husband and the man were still inside. I don't know which one had put the locks back down, but I've decided it wasn't my fate to find out. I went back to the house and removed every single mirror we owned. I never saw either of them again.
Thank you for watching this video. Big shout out to my patrons, Leaf Ninja, Roy Larimer, Mr. Creepypasta, Nicole Kister, Neon Scoundrel, William Delphin, and So Much Heresy. If you want to become a patron, buy merch, or join my Discord server, be sure to check out the links in the description. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.
Have you ever heard about the thing that the more complex the job, the more you'll get paid? Well, as a freelancer, this rings true almost all times. I have done several odd jobs, from dog walking to breaking up with random strangers for money. Hey, we all need money. Don't judge me. It has been a stretch of a dry spell since the pandemic and lockdown happened. I've been living rather frugally on my savings. And now that that's dwindling, I've been on the edge and scrolling through the odd jobs portal for something, anything to come up. My dry spell is finally broken with a job that came up on the portal. Wanted, a female with high integrity and clean background for a highly complex job. Should sign a confidentiality agreement at a disclosed place. Rate per hour, 500 INR. Whole day event, should be able to stay longer than needed. For future inquiries, DM. 500 INR for every hour? Sign me up. After some rounds of texts, I received the location. I don't recognize the address. This would be a profitable job if done right, even though they have been very vague about the job details. 1 hour later, I arrive at the location. It's a seemingly empty building with a guy standing outside who clearly doesn't belong here. "Are you Sush?" he asks me in a deep voice, his eyes darting around the dark neighborhood. "Yes." I answer faintly and follow him through a set of double-thick glass automatic doors. The stark white room is a contrast to the dank neighborhood. Another set of doors on my way through, I enter into a sterilized white room with a workspace in the middle of it. The man stretches out his hand for my phone and gives me a confidentiality agreement, basically detailing that this is a social experiment and I'm not supposed to say anything about the experiment to anyone. After signing the ridiculously high-paying job, he gestures me towards the workspace with a nod of his head. I pad to the table and sit down facing him in the room with no clock, no wall adornments. A hospital room would be far more cheerful compared to this place. On the table lies a bunch of blank paper and a pen beside it. The man continues. "On these sheets, write any story. Your life story, your dreams and wishes, anything. I will leave you to write whatever you need. For every hour you complete, we will deposit 500 in your account. There's no time limit on how much you want to write. Just press the button on the underside of the table when you're done. Any question?" A million questions swirl through my head, but I gape like a dying fish put out of water and nod mutely at him. A slow smile graces his face as he turns to leave. I pick up the pen and write about my story of my parents, my life, the incidents that changed my life, everything like I was possessed to write without any interruptions. With no clock in the room, it's challenging to keep track of the time. Some time has gone by as I finish the entire block of loose sheets. Just as I reach for the button, a small slit in the room opens, and out comes another set of papers. I stride across the room and take the papers, clutching them close to my chest, as it is the only connection to the outside world. How many hours have passed by? I have no idea. I hope I have enough money in my bank account now. I looked down on my dress and noticed it's slightly worn out, but it's barely registered in my mind. I have to write. Yes. Nothing else matters. Few things. I'm a researcher for the government. I don't care if I signed the paper or swore that oath. I'm dead anyway. I realized something, and I'm the last one. I know it's a bit cliche, but it's true, and this thing is not to be messed with. It's huge, at least 24 feet tall and 15 feet wide at what I can only assume to be its shoulders. Let me just start from the beginning. I was hired by the government to do work on things the public couldn't handle to see, like monsters, superhumans, all other abnormalities. This one was certainly no different. It went the same as any other abnormality. I got a call, I got ready, and we set off. When I got there, a home base was already set up, and I could see a hole that had to be at least 60 feet in diameter, and a lot of equipment was set up around it. We landed, and I was greeted by the general of the army. He said something along the lines of, "We have a major problem, and you're here to study. You'll be briefed when you get inside." Sure enough, when I got inside, I was met by a man who looked to be in his late 30s. He told me everything he knew at that point, and I'll just list a few. The hole was at a rough 80-degree drop. The walls have a gravitational pull that is similar to Earth, so the steep angle will not be a problem. The walls were made of a tungsten titanium alloy that was nearly impossible to break. The small amount of light appears to be a type of neon light. I was being sent in with a team of 20, 4 technicians, 3 researchers, 10 Marines, 1 equipment specialist, 1 video expert, and me. I was fitted with a harness that connected up to a tow hook and a powerful motor. I was told that if anything were to go wrong, I had to push the button next to my collarbone on my right side. This would cause a signal to be sent to the tow hook, and it would pull me back, where we were given enough food and supplies to last us all a week. And all the researchers and I were given enough paper to cover the entire opening twice over. I didn't know exactly what the Marines had, but I guess it's the regular stuff like food, water, and the usual. We entered the opening, and the change in direction of gravity made me lose my balance, but I got it back before I fell, and as I waited for the others to do the same, I looked down the rest of the hole, and I thought I saw something big retreat further into the darkness. But I couldn't tell. When everyone finally started moving, nothing important happened other than losing the sight of the entrance. We all thought we had somehow gotten turned around many times, but we all eventually decided it was impossible to get turned around without us knowing, because we had the tow hook tied to us. It took, I don't know how long to reach the end. We all had watches that told us how long we had been down there, but they stopped working at some point. The room we had made it to looked like it was made with the same stuff as the hole itself. The one difference is the room had to be 80 feet tall, and it was so long we couldn't see the end, but just as a guess, I said the room looked hexagonal because of the walls. We could see, for all we knew, it could have been a giant triangle or something like that. We all decided it would be best to keep heading in a line so it would be easier to get pulled out. As we walked, we saw nothing other than the plain darkness with the occasional light visible for a quick second, and soon we ran into a wall. This was strange in the fact that there was a slightly humanoid shape carved into it. I would explain to you what it looked like, but I don't have the words to. Just then, as we were taking notes, discussing, recording, and the like, we heard a loud thud next to us. When we looked over, we couldn't see anything, but I was the unfortunate one who looked up. But that might have saved my life. What I saw was a head that could be described as bony, ape-like, and oddly human-like. It had a hand on the wall, and it peered down at us, almost inquisitive. Then it let out this roar that made it feel like I was standing next to a speaker at a concert. I was about to hit the return button when I grabbed a notebook I was writing in, but when I turned back, I saw that the Marines had started shooting the thing. But before any of them could hurt that thing, it shot out a type of needle that impaled them and stuck them to the ground. I hit the button, still clutching the book, and without a thought for anyone else, I shot backwards to the hole, and as I was pulled back to the top, I heard the sounds of very quick thuds, as if that thing was chasing after me, and after a minute of sliding, I saw one bony hand land on the wall next to me, and then on the other side. When I turned on my flashlight, I saw that thing's face, not 10 feet from mine. When the light hit it, the thing recoiled and fled out from the range of my flashlight, but it was still chasing me. When I finally reached the top, the thud stopped and then retreated. As I got up, I realized I couldn't hear, and the thudding was just the vibration in my brain filling in the blank. Not thinking about anything else, I sat down in the snow and scribbled down what I just saw below the part where I had talked about the wall. I then threw it on the table next to the general and walked inside to go to sleep. Then I had a thought. If this thing can't be out in the light, when the night half of the year starts, there will be no stopping this thing from killing us all. Now to get to the part where I'm all alone. That thing has been taking pot shots by running up the hole, sticking an arm out and slamming it into the ground and then running back down, and it's been doing this every day. We have sent down many different groups. That thing has killed so many that most of the people have died, but the ones who haven't died left. I'm the last one, and I can see the sun starting to set as it reaches that time. I can't leave because the helicopter is destroyed, and the radio is destroyed, and even if it wasn't, it doesn't have any power anymore. I don't think they care that I'm gone and not coming back, but just maybe this will get me away from here so I can warn the right people, and if not, at least I won't die from it. I think this is my last night because yesterday it poked its head out and didn't retreat. So as a last-ditch effort, please don't go to the North Pole, because whatever's here certainly isn't Santa Claus.
There are people in the ocean. No, really, it's true. Not mermaids, none of that magical stuff, just people. Regular people. People like you and me, but they're in the ocean, not on land. Okay, I know, it's hard to believe, but quit interrupting me and just listen. There are people in the ocean. And sometimes on low tide you can see them, barely. But they're there. The tops of their heads bob with the dips of the waves, and you could tell that they're standing because they move from the force of the sea. The strands of hair float up with the water, and very, very rarely, you might see their face. But they just stand there, not moving. About 10 or 20 of them off the shoreline. I thought that maybe the people in the ocean would move, so I camped on the beach. I know it's illegal, but some things are worth a night in jail and a fine. I didn't sleep all night, just watched. Watched them watching me. And sometimes pieces of hair washed ashore, or a fingernail, subtle signs of a human being. I thought about collecting them for DNA testing, but why would I do that? I know where that person is. They're standing out in the ocean, looking at the shore. Looking at me. At us. I called out to them eventually, and then when I got no response, I started cussing at them, and then calling them all sorts of mean and nasty things, and they didn't say or do anything, and I broke down and cried. Just go and look. There are people in the ocean. But you have to go at a low tide. I don't know how they stand on the rocks and the shells there without cutting their feet. I don't know how they breathe or how they don't float away, but they are there, and you can see them. Yes, I did tell somebody. Well, I'm telling somebody. I'm telling you right now. I've told people before, and they don't believe me, but God, you can see it. You can see them. And I know they can see us. They can see us even though the seaweed wraps around their heads sometimes, and they stare for thousands of feet, yards, miles, and you know they aren't looking at you, but they are looking at you. Do you understand? No? I did try to swim out to them, eventually, after a week or so. I tried to put the people out of my mind and go on with my life, but they were still there with their blank expressions and their pruned skin, staring through and into the men who surfed the waves above them, the children who ran from each wave, and the parents who tried to coax the kids into the waters.
Maybe those kids know something that we don't. I don't want to get into the water anymore now that I see those people who see me. Well, I swam out to them. I wrote a will beforehand because I thought that they might try to drown me, but no. Their eyes just followed me until I passed their line of sight. Then straight back to the shore, to the people who saw me but not them. Somebody on the shoreline shouted and asked if I needed help, but I just stared. Stared at the people watching me now. Watching the hyperventilating girl treading water among tens of bobbing heads. But they didn't seem worried about the heads or the bodies those heads were attached to. Just the regular girl. I took a deep breath and dove. Despite the strangeness of the ocean people, there was still marine life. Fish swam through arms that slightly floated and between legs. There was a hermit crab that was crawling on the chest of someone. I even saw some barnacles on people that had been in the water for apparently a long time. But do you know what else I saw? More people. More and more and more and more people. An ocean of ocean people. A veritable field. The deeper I looked, the more people I saw, until the water itself blocked my vision. All staring, all looking at me, at us, at land. I swam down, following the gentle slope of the continent until I started dropping dramatically. By this point, I went up for air and then back down again to look at them. Most of them were covered by the living grime that seas deposit, so much so that I could barely see any discerning features except their eyes, which still moved and watched me. What did I do? What could I do? I couldn't dive any deeper, not without professional gear. I had looked and called out and done everything except interact with them. I swam down. I hesitated. My breath was running out. I'd been swimming for far too long. I still could ignore this. I could go home and sleep for 1,000 years. I could drug myself into a state where I would never see the ocean people's eyes again. I could drive far away, move to the mountains, live in a van, and pretend that I don't see them watching me from lakes now, and ponds, and creeks, and streams, puddles, glasses of water. I could do that. I reached out and grabbed the closest one to me. And immediately, I recognized that person in the ocean, who had only been watching me with their eyes, who hadn't moved a muscle, and was so calcified as to be a functional statue. It was me. I don't know how I got out or how I was found. I ended up in a hospital somewhere 30 miles away from the shoreline. I think I drowned. Maybe I'm still drowning. You don't believe me. That's okay. Most people don't. I didn't expect you to. But if you ever find yourself with some time and it's a low tide, you should go to the beach. Maybe you'll see them. Maybe you won't. If you don't see them, hooray! You should be glad for that. If you do, well, just be careful is all. There are people in the ocean, you know. I live in a small town where I moved into 3 years ago. While referred to as a town, it's actually closer to a village because we don't have many tall buildings here and only 2 main streets. Around the town is surrounded with thick forests and plains leading to mountains just a couple kilometers away. I myself happen to live in one of the few multi-story buildings on the 2nd floor, with the window facing the main street. Previously, we had an open balcony outside my window, but not too long ago, we did a renovation and added walls, turning it into a proper, albeit small, room. We left the door, though, so there was still another window between my room and the now closed balcony. Anyway, the thing happened 2 weeks ago. I randomly woke up at night at roughly 6 a.m. It was raining outside. Instead of falling back asleep, I decided to check my phone. While at it, at some point, I heard a moderately loud noise. It sounded as if water droplets were hitting the sheet of metal, which under the circumstances didn't feel weird at all. The only thing I was bothered or rather annoyed is just how loud it was. I thought I might have left the window open, and I thought I'd go close it, but then I remembered I did close it before I went to bed. So I just put off my phone and decided to ignore it to the best of my ability while trying to fall back asleep. Strangely, before I did, the noise stopped. Shortly, it started again, except much quieter, which then didn't bother me at all. The next day, I went to get the groceries. As I walked down the street, I glanced over my building, the side that my room was facing, looking for what the water was hitting that could cause the noise. Strangely, I didn't see any sheets of metal mounted anywhere. Even stranger, I realized that our windows didn't have a sill installed after renovation. They were just bare windows mounted into a concrete wall, and so was the case for the neighboring apartments. I could bet it was a windowsill the water was hitting, but now I was left without an idea. A day later, you guessed, it was raining as well, and just like last time, I woke up at night. The rain was quiet. That is, until I heard the noise again. It wasn't as loud as it was before. I got curious and at last got off of my bed to peek through the curtains. At first, I didn't see anything, and shortly the noise stopped. And then there was a pause as I kept looking. And then, it happened. I saw something rising outside, as if it was climbing the wall, slowly and carefully. I couldn't make out many details because it was dark, but the silhouette was definitely that of a human head and a hand with abnormally long fingers. When that thing climbed to the point that I could see its shoulders, it froze. I felt both curious and scared from what I was seeing. Is someone climbing the building at night? I thought. Could it be a burglar? But what happened next completely terrified me. With its long index finger, it started knocking on the window, making that same exact noise that woke me up the other day. The same sound as if droplets from a surface above were hitting a metal sheet at a constant pace. I couldn't move. I just kept staring at it through the opening in the curtains. It kept knocking for roughly half a minute before it finally stopped and froze again, looking inside the window. After a short pause, it started climbing again. That was when I realized it was completely naked. And the figure was skinny, too. It climbed the wall effortlessly, like a gecko would climb on glass. And then shortly after, it happened again. Same noise, except quieter, as if it was knocking on the window above. And then again, but one more floor higher. I've got no idea what it was and why it was doing what it did. Could it be it was trying to lure out the people inside? Did it see me, or was it too dark for it to notice me? I'm pretty sure what I was seeing wasn't a dream. I did hear that a kid went missing a week before my encounter, though. I didn't give it much thought at the time. At any rate, closing all the windows and curtains is the first thing I do now before I go to bed. The rain is not the same for me anymore. I used to enjoy rainy weather. And that thing took it from me. So in my late teens and early 20s, I was a professional performer, always in a different show, touring to different cities, performing in different theaters. When I was in a show and we made our stop into NC, we performed in this beautiful, charming theater. I had a routine of going to rehearsal, stopping at this little cafe with some friends for dinner or coffee, and then going back to the hotel. I was walking into the hotel, looked to my right, where off to the side from the lobby was this cute little fireplace and standing bar. I saw a man with brown hair, glasses, wearing a pinstripe suit, reading the newspaper. I remember staring for some reason, and before looking away to walk to the elevator, he looked up and grinned and tilted his head, and then went back to reading. He didn't have a drink at his table. I looked at the bartender, who was texting. The next day before leaving rehearsal, I was on stage talking to the director before he went backstage. I looked out to where my bag was on the seats in the audience. And a little farther back, I remember feeling shocked because he was sitting there, in the same suit, reading a newspaper. He grinned at me again and went back to reading. I had chills and felt uncomfortable. I thought maybe he had followed me. I ran backstage and asked my friend to come out on stage with me for a second. She was really confused and asking why I was in a panic. He wasn't there anymore. That night at the hotel, I asked the bartender if he knew if this guy was a guest or not, because if he was, I was changing hotels. He asked me what time, and I said around 9 p.m. He said no one was there from 8 to 9:30, and only had 2 people around 9:45 before closing. He said that no man of that description was there. I told him I saw him texting, and the man was 3 tables away from the bar. He said definitely not. I asked my cast and crew if they ever saw a man in the theater in the audience matching that description, and they said no. Security also said no. I asked the front desk staff at the hotel, who said no, but that it wasn't surprising as he's been seen at the bar before and inquired about before. Apparently, a man had been brutally murdered at that hotel in the lobby the same night he was seeing a show at the theater nearby. The night before I left, I had a dream that a man was sitting at the desk near my bed in my room, that he was reading the newspaper and looked over at me and said he was in pain, and asked if he could stay there for a while because he knew what was going to happen if he went to the lobby. I felt frozen and terrified and said, okay. He moved my backpack to spread his newspaper out. The next morning, my backpack was on the ground and closed, when I normally kept it in the middle of the desk and open. Hi guys, thank you so much for watching. Just wanted to thank my patrons, Tam B, Jen Miser, Sky Mara Ravenswood, Melissa Perez, Mr. Sankofa, Leaf Ninja, Roy Larimer, Mr. Creepypasta, Neon Scoundrel, and William Delphin. If you'd like to become a patron, join my Discord, or see my other social media, check out the links in the description below. Also, let me know how I can be praying for you. Thanks again, and I'll see you guys in the next video.